Metroid Fusion is hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, easily one of the games of all time. But is it one of the best games of all time? Yes. The answer is yes. Metroid is a juggernaut of gaming franchises. It's been creating a powerful impression on fans and developers for the last 4 decades. It even helped define an entire genre of games. Metroid Fusion is widely considered one of the best Game Boy Advance games. But what exactly makes it so damn good? And why has this 8 megabyte cartridge left a legacy that continues to this day? To find out, we have to go back in time to the origins of the series and discover how this game even came into existence. Then we'll dive deeper into the game itself to deconstruct all of its elements. And finally, like an X-Parasite fusing with Samus, we'll fuse everything we know into one final verdict. This is Metroid Fusion. Metroid began as an action game on the Famicom, and it was developed by Nintendo's Research and Development 1 studio, and released in Japan on August 6, 1986. Metroid was designed to be a shooting game that combined platforming jumping of Super Mario with the non-linear exploration of Legend of Zelda. The name Metroid came from a portmanteau of Metro and Android, alluding to the underground setting of the first game with the robot-like protagonist Samus. And speaking of Samus, about halfway through the development of the first Metroid, one of the staff members came up with the idea of the person inside the suit being a woman. This was before the Tomb Raiders and Perfect Darks, when female protagonists of action games weren't as common. And actually, Ridley Scott's 1979 film Alien was a huge influence to the series. And because of this, the giant winged creature Ridley got its name, after director Ridley Scott. The development staff was also influenced by the works of the film's creature designer H.R. Giger, which later influenced many other video game aesthetics like Scorn and Axiom Verge.
You must help Samus save the universe again in Metroid 2. Metroid 2, The Return of Samus, only on Game Boy.
A few years later, in 1991, Metroid 2, Return of Samus was released for the Game Boy. Surprisingly, in North America first, and then the next year in Japan and Europe. This was a stripped-down evolution of the NES entry, featuring new power-ups and enemies, but with a simple monochrome art style and more linear exploration, given the limitations of the Game Boy. And in the same year, Nintendo's R&D 1 studio began development on Super Metroid for the SNES. This took about 3 years of development and drastically expanded the Metroid formula with tons of power-ups and a deeper storyline. Super Metroid is widely acclaimed as one of the best SNES games and one of the best Metroid games in the entire franchise. The fluidity of Samus's controls, the difficulty being just hard enough but not too hard, and plenty of exploration. This game is often considered a masterpiece and a gold standard of the entire Metroidvania genre. After the release of Super Metroid, Nintendo went dark, with no Metroid games for 8 years.
We will live the game through our hands. We will be in control of something. We will change the system.
So what happened during the N64? Well, a lot happened, and that's putting it lightly.
What are you gonna do?
As the first 3D Nintendo console, many franchises made the leap from 2D to 3D, including games like the highly coveted Donkey Kong 64. But in a 1997 issue of Next Generation magazine, Metroid 64 was mentioned as one of the most eagerly awaited games for the Nintendo 64, and it was listed as being developed and published by Nintendo with a release date of TBA. Now, Nintendo was considering a Metroid game for the N64, but they couldn't decide on a firm idea. Game director Yoshio Sakamoto said he couldn't imagine how the N64 controller would move Samus, and he felt that the move to 3D was just a little too early. And so despite all of the potential of the Nintendo Ultra 64, there was no Metroid installation for this console generation and for the foreseeable future. But in 2000, Shigeru Miyamoto visited a new Nintendo subsidiary, Retro Studios, in Texas. They were in the process of developing 4 projects for the GameCube: a vehicle combat game, an American football simulator, an RPG game, and an action-adventure game named Metaforce. Miyamoto was disappointed with all of their games. Allegedly, he would rant at them in Japanese for about a minute and a half, and then the translator would just say he's upset. However, he took a liking to their demo of the Metaforce game engine, which was a third-person sci-fi action game with a female protagonist. Miyamoto gave Retro Studios the grand task of developing a new Metroid game using this game engine. So, the studio went all in on Metroid Prime, canceling the development of those 3 other games and putting all of their resources into developing this new Metroid game. Metroid Prime released for the GameCube on November 18, 2002, as the first 3D Metroid game. Metroid Prime received wide acclaim from critics and fans alike, and it sold 2.84 million copies worldwide. For almost 20 years, it was the best-selling Metroid game in the series, only being dethroned by Metroid Dread on the Switch. But there was another Metroid game that also released the same day as Metroid Prime. It was a 2D entry on the Game Boy Advance, with the title
Metroid Fusion.
Fusion was developed by Nintendo's R&D 1, the same studio behind Super Metroid. It marked an enormous return after an 8-year hiatus from 1994. But we wouldn't have Metroid Fusion without Metroid Prime. Nintendo had no plans on returning to the original 2D Metroid style, until a preview of Metroid Prime was shown at Space World 2000. According to a former Retro Studios employee, the hype that this reveal generated led Nintendo to start developing Fusion as a companion game to Metroid Prime. And by E3 2001, they made progress, I think, with the working title Metroid 4, and also a working art style that wasn't really working with the crowd. Allegedly, there was a collective groan when this was revealed. I mean, what are we even looking at here? They made Samus look like Mr. Game & Watch had a baby with another world. And then in a desperate attempt to get people hyped again, they threw a 3D animation at the end. So that's sick. Overall, I'd give this reveal a C-. However, just 1 year later at E3 2002, Metroid Fusion was unveiled, a much more polished and stylized take on the classic Metroid formula. While Metroid Prime was a new first-person adventure experience, Metroid Fusion was a true return to form, with traditional side-scrolling adventure and exploration that defined the series. Despite being a portable companion entry to Prime, it evolved the classic 2D Metroid formula in almost every aspect, starting with its very distinct visual style. This game has a beautiful art style with a bold and instantly recognizable color palette. Tones of purple and fuchsia can be felt in every single area. Meanwhile, vivid blue shadows and neon green accents are woven throughout to create a rich sense of sci-fi exploration. The crisp line work and subtle shading blend perfectly together, and colorful enemies really pop from the background. Speaking of popping from the background, Fusion uses a technique called parallax scrolling to create a sense of depth and separation from the background. In parallax scrolling, the background is rendered at a higher resolution and moved independently from the foreground, giving the feeling of distance between you and the background. Super Metroid uses a similar technique, so you can imagine how this felt like a portable Super Nintendo at the time. When it comes to environments, Fusion has 6 biomes, referred to as sectors. Each sector has a unique theme accompanied by a very clever naming scheme. You begin your journey landing on the main deck of a space station, which kind of acts as a hub world above the sectors. It's the heart of the BSL station, not BBL station. That's a topic for another video. The 6 sectors below the main deck include SRX, which mimics the environment of SR388, TRO for tropic, essentially an overgrown, tropical and infested biome, PYR for pyro, which is a hot desert biome with plenty of sand and lava, AQA for Aqua, as you'd assume is an aquatic biome, with about half of it underwater and some occasional electric hazards. ARC for Arctic, a frozen tundra biome with frosted over machinery. And NOC for Nocturnal. This is a much darker biome with distant caves and nocturnal enemies. The enemy designs of Fusion are bold and weird, feeling more like mutated creatures than natural biologic beings. They warp and glitch when the X-parasites transform into them, which further brings a sense of sci-fi unease to their existence. And the X-parasites absolutely pop from the backgrounds with their pseudo three-dimensional amoebus forms. When it comes to bosses of the game, there are 14 boss fights in Fusion, and each one is memorable and iconic. They continued the theme of man-made sci-fi horror, spanning from a weaponized security robot to a supercharged sea dragon, and even an X-parasite clone of Ridley. Every boss fight is a balance of challenging and satisfying, as you look for that small opening to launch your attack before dodging the inevitable counterattack. And every big battle ends with a Core X fight, where a large hard-shelled X-parasite follows you in an unpredictably organic way, and you have to finish it off for good to get the power-up that's inside. It's a satisfying and rhythmic ending to intense battles that is still challenging and potentially lethal if you don't have enough health to spare. In this Metroid entry, suit upgrades are obtained every 20 minutes or so. So progression is always happening and it feels great. Since it's a more linear experience, there's less aimless backtracking and you feel like you're making progress. And any backtracking often has a mission attached to it with a clear objective. Now, the level designs are where Fusion finds a lovely balance of exploration and linearity. The story-based structure keeps you on rails when it comes to your objectives, but you're able to find your own path through the sectors to those objectives, and of course discover energy, missile, and bomb capacity upgrades along the way. Unfortunately for traditional Metroid fans and speedrunners, Fusion is basically the one Metroid game that's strictly linear. There's only 2 sequence breaks that have been discovered so far, and only one of them lets you beat the game through its use of memory corruption. So this is an experience that's truly linear by design, and I think it's an excellent change of pace that's more approachable than the open-ended formula from its console counterparts. Having played every 2D Metroid entry in order to capture game footage for this video, I can tell you that a little structure goes a long way, especially when it comes to bringing in a new audience to the Metroid genre. I definitely prefer non-linear Metroid entries, but Fusion is a refreshing entry that has a cinematic flair to it compared to other entries in the series. Now, my favorite part about this game is the controls. The controls introduced in Fusion are hands down perfection. They're intuitive and purposeful, which makes it even more impressive with the limited control scheme of the Game Boy Advance. A is to jump, B is to fire your arm cannon, hold R to fire your missiles and power bombs, and hold L to fire diagonally. It's simple and very natural to pick up and play. The momentum and flow of Samus's movement is also a huge highlight, as her movement feels extremely fluid and crisp. According to the lead programmer, Katsuya Yamano, Nintendo R&D 1 didn't consult previous Metroid games for programming techniques, and instead used their previous game Wario Land 4 as a reference. So the game was built on a heavily modified version of the Wario Land 4 engine, and you can even see Wario Land 4 blocks in the Fusion debug room. Now, this was a very bold decision that paid off in a big way. Super Metroid is a fantastic game, one of the best of all time, but the control scheme often feels cumbersome and Samus's movement feels smooth but also heavy. On the other hand, Metroid Fusion feels like the ankle weights are removed and Samus can move in every direction with ease. It's honestly hard to go back and play Super Metroid after playing Fusion and Zero Mission, with the fluidity of the movement and intuitive control schemes. Now, I didn't grow up with Super Metroid, so I might be ruffling some feathers, but just give these GBA entries a shot, you know? Now when it comes to difficulty, this particular entry in the series takes a unique approach of never making you feel too powerful. No matter how many power-ups you get or how much progress you think you're making, you're always being hunted, working for someone else, and always kept in the dark. Becoming more powerful feels necessary for your survival, and while steamrolling through mobs is often a pretty mindless task, the boss fights can really heat up and leave you gripping your controller a little tighter than you thought you were. Fuck! As a whole, the game is just difficult enough to challenge you, while leaving room to appreciate the battles and level design along the way. It's not a game that's hard just for the sake of masochism. It's challenging with a purpose, and the result is very rewarding as you stack power-ups along the way, evolving from a basic arm cannon to a fully spec'd out machine. But again, Metroid Fusion doesn't want you to feel powerful. In fact, you practically spend the entire game being hunted by something that could eviscerate you on sight. You know what also gets eviscerated? Your freedom, as the Federation keeps you on an extremely tight leash. So tight that it starts to get annoying. Having to stop and get orders at every single navigation point and get yapped at by the computer gets very annoying after a while. Especially as it presses further and you begin to step out of line. Now I get that the best art makes you feel the strongest emotions, but feeling the frustration of being kept on a leash, then breaking free only for the story to just end happily ever after feels just okay, I guess. It's a bit of a corny ending too. Early on in the game, Samus nicknames her starship computer Adam because it reminds her of her former commander, Adam Malkovich. And in the end, it's revealed that the computer is actually, in fact, a subscribe button. I know, I was also shocked, especially finding out that you could press it. Either way, the computer turns out to, in fact, be Adam. Pretty crazy twist, right? Whose personality was uploaded to a computer prior to his death. And he finally snaps out of the Federation control and helps Samus survive in the end. And of course, with the help of some cute critters. Overall, the writing has a cliche 90s movie flair to it, so don't expect any natural or subtle dialogue. Now, when it comes to replayability, a linear experience like Fusion is a bit of a mixed bag. There's tons of hidden secrets, ways to speed up your run and beat your fastest time, and teeth-gritting moments that make coming back to this game still very exciting. Fusion feels like Metroid with a cinematic twist, so it's very enjoyable and often something that's nostalgic to come back to. It's like a sci-fi movie that you can play. Just like a movie, I wouldn't rewatch it back to back, so I wouldn't replay Metroid Fusion as much as a game like Zero Mission. Now, while the storyline and frequent cutscenes can be a bit overbearing, Fusion's narrative emphasis is inherently charming. The moral friction between Samus and Adam, the faceless Federation pulling the strings, and the sci-fi tropes woven throughout are reminiscent of classic blockbuster movies and novels. Like many other aspects in the game, they were calculated risks, and the development team put it all on the line. Fusion isn't trying to be a portable Super Metroid or a traditional non-linear exploration game. It's a confident, concise, story-driven experience, and it's made an enormous impact on the video game industry that can still be felt today. So that's Metroid Fusion in a nutshell, a cinematic evolution of the classic Metroid formula, and one that can be played anywhere with just a handful of AA batteries. What started as a companion game for Prime ended up mutating into the perfect pocket Metroid entry. You might say it's bad, or you might say it's great, but in my opinion, Metroid Fusion is excellent. Thanks for watching.